I have been trying to record this initial episode, I don't know how many times now. There's something about just sitting in a room talking to yourself that's really, really hard. I do not understand what it is. But anyway, attempt number 267 or whatever the number will be. Welcome to Cracking Quantum. My name is Dr. Ashley Lyons. I'm a physicist from the University of Glasgow, and I'm going to be your host for this podcast series. Before I start going with the actual podcast, which is going to be interviews with people who are far, far more interesting than me, I wanted to begin with an overview of what this podcast series is going to be about, what to expect, and a little bit about who I am as well, so you know who's rambling in your ear. If you're not interested in that and you want to hear from the far more interesting people, please do just skip ahead to the next episode. I'm not going to be offended. I've given you permission to ignore me and just go listen to someone else. So please do go ahead and do that if you want to. So let's start with why I decided to start this podcast. Really what I want to try and do is answer this fundamental question of what is quantum? What does that word actually mean? What does it mean to the scientists who supposedly understand what the quantum science is all about? What does it mean to people who are developing the technologies, who are actually turning that science and doing something useful with it? And what does it mean to everybody else as well? What does it mean to the general public who usually aren't involved in quantum science in any shape or form, but will hopefully see some benefit from it? Otherwise, why are we as scientists investigating it? And the approach that I kind of want to take to answering that question really comes from a few different interactions I've had with people who are outside of that realm of quantum science. So people who are either doing science which is different. I have plenty of opportunity in my work life to interact with people who are doing things related to biology and healthcare and social science and artists and people like that as well sometimes. And obviously they typically don't have any real clue about what quantum is, but also just interacting with anybody else who's not involved in life at a university. My wife, for example, isn't a scientist by any means, but I've had some really interesting conversations with her about what quantum science really is and what it's trying to do. So that's kind of the level that I want to approach this question from. I'm not expecting anybody to come into this series with any knowledge at all of physics or engineering or maths. This is very much a podcast for people who know absolutely nothing about quantum and just want to hear a little bit more. They want to hear what that quantum science is actually about. What are people doing? If you do have a little bit more experience with quantum science, by the way, there's an excellent podcast series called Inside Quantum, which is run by Stephen Thompson at the University of Edinburgh. He tends to dive into things with a little bit more of that assumed knowledge. So people, for example, are at university studying physics that want to go a bit deeper into quantum. He's got a fantastic series. I really encourage people to check it out. This podcast series, though, is really aiming to take things from the very beginning. So I know nothing about the science, but I want to understand a little bit more. I want to take it as an opportunity to show what a lot of the people around me are actually up to as well. So not just explain some of the basics of the quantum science, but really show what the research is that people are doing in my area. And I mean that both in the scientific sense and the geographical sense. As I said, I'm at the University of Glasgow. The UK does really well as a whole in terms of quantum science and technology. The quantum research area is fantastic. And actually, Scotland in particular is really strong in this, and particularly the area that we refer to as the Central Belt, so the stretch across Glasgow and Edinburgh. There's a really high concentration of whole bunch of different research groups who are investigating quantum science in some aspect, some shape or form. Plenty of companies starting to develop interest in quantum technologies and develop them as well. It really is one of the places to be doing this quantum science. And that means there's loads of people around me who are doing really interesting work that I'm hopefully going to pull in and convince to do an episode or two with me. Because a lot of the time, most people don't see what this research is and what's going on. And it's such a shame because it can be so interesting. And I've seen this when people come to university and they get tours around our labs. A lot of people get really excited by what we're showing them. And it's not something that everybody has the opportunity to do. But instead, what I can do is at least talk to some people and let you all listen into the conversations I'm having. And actually, this is a really good way of learning what the quantum science is really about. So there's only so far you can go if you watch one or two YouTube videos that explain how entanglement work, for example, or why things like quantum communications are important, or what a quantum computer is. These are good for kind of getting a bit of a foothold in the understanding of what it's about. But it's my kind of feeling that that sort of thing lacks something in terms of the understanding and the explanation. And it's not that any of those are wrong, it's just they're presenting something that's incorrect. It's more that it doesn't really go that extra step to explain what the quantum science is really doing and how to actually interpret what the maths behind quantum mechanics is actually saying. And that's something that I didn't really understand myself until I was a PhD student investigating quantum science and how to set up pairs of photons so that they're entangled. It's something that is difficult to get to grips with, even if you are an undergraduate student studying physics and you're taking a course on quantum theory. It's hard to kind of appreciate actually what those equations mean. And the way that I actually learnt what I know now, which is by no means everything about quantum science, I'm still very much exploring myself what a lot of this science that's going on around me actually means. But the way that I learned what I know now was to be involved in the discussions with people who either know more or were learning at the same time as me. That experience of talking to other people and discussing was invaluable. It was the thing that really helped me get to grips with how to understand what's going on. And that's something that I want to try and imitate a little bit with this series. Of course, not everybody gets the opportunity to talk to some of these quantum scientists, but at the very least, I can be talking to people for you and let you listen in on the conversations. And hopefully that's a good way of learning how quantum scientists actually think. There is a huge amount of interest in this word quantum. And that goes all the way from the media, so even science fiction, TV shows and movies. The word quantum is used all the time. And a lot of the time it's used either incorrectly or to explain something that's not really explainable. It's kind of like sometimes uses this magic word to say, oh, we don't really know how to explain this, so we'll just call it quantum, and that'll do. That's a good enough explanation. And that can obviously lead to a lot of misunderstanding. There are a certain few topics that I think are generally not well understood by the general public, that I think really to understand properly, it means talking to quantum scientists, as I've kind of been saying just a few moments ago. But the interest in quantum goes from that area of science fiction all the way into the real world, governments investing heavily in quantum technologies. So a good example of this is the UK about 2 years ago now, pledged to invest £2.5 billion in quantum technologies over a 10-year period. So huge amounts of money and really quite long timescales as well. So this is not just a few research grants, this is real heavy investment. And that can't be for no reason. Like, there's gotta be reasons why people are willing to put this amount of money behind quantum technologies and developing them. There've got to be some benefits. And that's one of the things that I want to explore as part of this series is really, why are people interested in quantum technologies? The answer to this question, what is quantum, is difficult. And I've seen, I don't know how many scientists now stumble over this question. It's hard to find a single answer that really encapsulates what quantum science is all about. And I struggle with this myself. When I say it's not an easy question to answer, I find it really difficult. I'm not surprised that other people do as well. There are a few typical answers that people tend to give. The closest one that I hear to being a really, really good answer, and this is the answer that John Jeffers gives in a few episodes' time, is that quantum science is the science of things that are very, very small. And that's true. It definitely captures quite a lot of what we call quantum science. It tends to be that a lot of these effects that we see, like superposition and entanglement, we can see relatively easily when you get down to single particles, electrons and atoms, and are way more difficult to see when you go to much larger objects. So in that sense, it is the science of things that are very small. But that answer becomes difficult when you start looking at things like light. So we use light a lot to investigate quantum mechanics. We quite often entangle pairs of photons, which are the particles of light, to investigate quantum effects. And then if you start asking yourself, well, what does small mean with regards to light? That becomes a harder question to answer. So that answer is the science of things that are very small. It captures quite a lot, but by no means everything. And it also doesn't really give the right kind of impression of what quantum technologies are actually doing. Because if you think it's just looking at things that are very, very small, you're not necessarily going to come to conclusions about what the advantages of that science are. You know, how do I go from the science of things that are small to having secure communication, or having quantum computers that can do operations that a classical computer can't, and things like this. A lot of the advantages that we see in quantum science are really quite diverse as well. Quantum science tends to be split into a few relatively distinct areas, and the kind of the quantum magic, so the bit of physics or engineering that makes each of those areas work, might be actually completely different, although they all rely fundamentally in quantum mechanics. And the advantages that they give are also going to be completely different. So in my research life, I work in an area called quantum sensing and imaging, which means that I play around with things like entanglement and things like quantum interference to build microscopes and imaging systems that either you can't build using classical mechanics, or to give you some advantage, like you can image things that are a little bit smaller, for example. And the advantages that quantum mechanics gives me is completely different to, for example, the advantages to someone in quantum computing who might say that, well, the quantum lets me build a computer that can operate way faster or do way more calculations or solve equations that I can't solve with classical computing at all. So trying to break down what is quantum in that sense is difficult, because there's so many different answers that you could give, and some of them are kind of seemingly disconnected when you look at them at face value. And again, you kind of come back to Well, the only way to really understand what quantum science as a whole is all about is to talk to quite a few different people. And that's what I'm aiming to do as part of this series. I don't just want to be talking to people who do the imaging and sensing like I do. I want to be talking to people in quantum communications and computing and all the different areas that quantum is really starting to be explored. So I promised a little bit of information about who I am. As I said, my name is Dr. Ashley Lyons, and I am a physicist. I started my career as a physicist at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, and then moved across to University of Glasgow about 7 years ago now, where I have a Royal Academy of Engineering Research Fellowship, and I also have a position as a lecturer within the university, which is a very long-winded way of saying that I'm a university lecturer, but actually my salary at the minute is paid to do the research rather than the teaching. So I'm a lecturer that doesn't really lecture that much. I mostly focus on the research. As I said, I am a quantum scientist. That's how I would, that's how I'd kind of identify myself within the community. I work in a particular area of quantum imaging and sensing called quantum optics, which means I use light, I use photons to do my science, rather than using atoms or electrons or something like that. And there's huge differences between quantum optics and the other areas of quantum, which we will definitely hear about in the following episodes. There's an episode that I've already recorded with Jack Brennan, where he uses superconducting components to do his quantum science. And that looks completely different to the kind of thing that I do every day, even though Jack literally works in the same floor of the same building as me. As you can probably guess from the fact that hopefully you can understand what I'm saying, I'm not from Glasgow or Scotland originally. I'm from Nottinghamshire. I went to school in an area which is close to Lincoln, so I'm from the middle of England, but I've been in Scotland a long time. I've been here since 2009, so this is really like a second home to me. I really enjoy being in Scotland, partly because, as I said, there's lots of quantum research that's going on here, so it's an excellent opportunity for me to be involved within the community doing this kind of thing, but also it's just a fantastic place to live. An amazing landscape. There's so much amazing scenery around me compared to where I grew up, which is an area of the country that is almost entirely flat. Being up here in Scotland is fantastic. Before I finish up, there's a few thank yous that I definitely wanted to say. The first one to Micah Seagrist, who put together the music that you heard at the start. I think she's done a fantastic job. I really like the track that she's put together. The next one to Millie Mather, who helped me with the logo for the podcast series. Massive thank you to everybody who has recorded an episode with me so far. And the last thank you to my wife, Sam. She's been really helpful talking through ideas with me around this podcast series. She's probably fed up of me talking about things and not putting anything else. So thank you very much for bearing with me, Sam. One of the things that I would really love throughout the series is to hear from you. I would love to hear if there are any questions around quantum mechanics that you would like answered, if there's any areas that you want to hear people talk about, even if it's feedback just to say, what you're doing is terrible, please shut up. I mean, that's valuable feedback to have, I guess. I'd sooner it be positive, but anything which is constructive would also be good. Of course, you need a way of contacting me. You can do so at ash@crackingquantum.co.uk. That's ash@crackingquantum, all one word, .co.uk. Just drop me an email about anything that you would like around the podcast. I'd love to hear from anybody. So with that, I think it's time I stopped rambling on and we actually moved on to way more interesting things and actually start talking about the quantum science and what it looks like. So with that, I present to you Cracking Quantum.